dance like a cartoon cat. All those summer days, remember Montauk. If you can, it's crashing into waves. Welcome to Channel 8 and a half. Hello, and thank you for joining us at Channel 8 and a half, a show about movies and TV and pop culture. My name is Joe Galino.
And I'm Andrew Hanna.
Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe, especially since today we're talking about the way time is depicted in film.
Yes.
Not necessarily time travel, rather non-linear storytelling. One of the most popular examples of this, of course, is Pulp Fiction or Memento, and really any Christopher Nolan film. But an even earlier example of this is Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, I have not seen this movie. I don't know much about it other than the basis of it, but you've seen it, right?
Yes, I have. And so it's basically a movie that takes four different perspectives and layers them on top of one incident. And that's the point of what we're talking about today. It's not time travel movies, like you said. It's not time loops. Last week we talked about Palm Springs. That's a time loop. This is more playing with nonlinear storytelling, but Rashomon becomes the basis for a lot of quote unquote nonlinear stories. And anytime a story is told nonlinearly, it becomes a Rashomon type story. But Rashomon, even though it's told in a non-linear way, it deals with the rape and murder of this couple and the different perspectives, the four different perspectives of the eyewitness testimony, and the differences in how eyewitness testimony is not always necessarily correct, the way that those different perceptions can be skewed by the individual seeing the event or telling the story.
Kind of like my cousin Vinny.
Kind of like my cousin Vinny. Interesting. Haven't heard that one before.
Very, very similar, right?
But it's in that way that things like Pulp Fiction and Go, right? The 1999 movie, which also has nonlinear storytelling. So it's not really a Rashomon type story in that it's not taking one event and showing the different biases and perceptions that people have to that event.
Yeah, it seems like Rashomon is more close to Vantage Point than it is to Pulp Fiction, which I haven't seen Vantage Point, but from the trailers it seems as though it's the same event occurring, but multiple people at that event perceive it in a different way based on their own preconceived biases or perceptions.
Yeah, and Vantage Point is the not very good version of that story. It's a fine thriller, but it's not great.
Yeah.
More so in the Memento vein, where Memento is following a character who is an unreliable narrator, and seeing the world through his eyes, and he is lying to us. You know, The Usual Suspects, you could make an argument, is more of a Rashomon type story in that Kevin Spacey's character is an unreliable narrator the entire time, but we don't know it at the end.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to talk about is really that dichotomy in film, the way that time is played with, the way that perception is played with in storytelling. And what we wanted to start off with, I know a movie that you like quite a bit, 500 Days of Summer.
Yes, yeah. So I actually rewatched it this past week in preparation for this episode because I haven't seen it in so many years. And most of it holds up as far as the story goes and sort of the exploration of the manic pixie dream girl and then also the nice guy archetype. But the side characters like Chloe Grace Moretz are not as great as I remember them. Like
the very wise younger sister.
Yeah, her charm definitely wears off over the years. But as far as the film structure goes, I think 500 Days of Summer perfectly fits in this
Rashomon effect type storytelling of perception. Biased perception, because we're following Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character and his looking back at the relationship with Zooey Deschanel, and it's very much biased towards what he thinks was she, quote unquote, the villain of the relationship, the good times, the bad times, how they are different, especially in the IKEA scene, the mirroring of being in IKEA at the beginning and then being in IKEA at the end of the relationship, and how that perception changes.
Yeah, it's a great combination of the Rashomon effect by having the story told through the eyes of an extremely biased character, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, Tom, but also the manner in which they play with time, which mimics the way that we recall past memories, non-sequentially, in sort of a jumble of memories jumping back and forth. And like you mentioned, a great example of this is the IKEA scene where he recalls this inside joke that they have where he says, "Oh, our sinks aren't working, honey," when they're in IKEA. And they show you him making the joke toward the end of the relationship when the joke has gone stale due to the tension between them, and then immediately rewind to the day that they first made the
I
joke.
was just remembering the scene and I was like, the ending of that scene, showing it from
Mhm.
the when everything
Well,
goes sour perspective, it becomes like a horror movie.
oh,
Like,
it's terrible,
it's
yeah.
so awkward and terrible.
But I like that they diverted from the impulse to set the joke up first
Mhm.
and then seeing it go sour. Instead, they flipped it so that you see it first when it's already lost its novelty. And when he does go back to the first time, it acts as this momentary catharsis because it's such a sweet scene that you almost forget how uncomfortable it gets later in the relationship or earlier in the movie.
In the way that memory works like that.
Exactly, exactly. They present it in the way that you'd recall it or tell the story to a friend, one thought leading to another and then going down the rabbit hole. I also love that this movie wasn't bound by any one technique of storytelling, not only the non-sequential aspect, but also the method in which the story was told.
Very music video style.
Yeah, exactly. At one point, they have the music video scene, and then halfway through the movie, they go into this 1950s esque
Yeah.
documentary where we're given backstory on Summer, but in a very third person view that a book would utilize, where they're giving you information that even Summer might not know about herself. Like that after she quoted a song in her yearbook, the band discovered an unexplained spike in record
There's
sales.
a dance number in it. There's an animated piece. There's a little animated piece where the bird flies on his finger.
Yeah, exactly. And the film establishes just how lost Tom is in his own diluted sense of reality. And it all comes to head in one of my favorite scenes in film, or at least in romantic films, which is the expectation versus reality scene. It was just so realistic in the way that it presented the natural inclination to build a preconceived narrative before or during an important event. But did it in such a simple manner. I feel like the obvious way to most filmmakers would have done the thing where they show the scene play out first in a fantasy and then show it play out in real life. Instead, they put both expectation and reality side by side in a split screen, which is the way that Tom sort of lives his life, where he isn't necessarily living in the moment, but fantasizing about how it could play out, which is why he tends to miss the plain signs that Summer is just not in love with him. And eventually, when he sees Summer showing off her engagement ring, reality completely takes over the frame, pushing out expectation, and his fantasy falls apart and is no longer even possible.
There's no more dream to be had.
Yeah, and his sister calls him out on it when she tells him, You're too afraid to ask the question because you're afraid that your fantasy will crumble," which is, in a way, summing up Tom's character perfectly in that he ignores the plainly obvious and chooses to look for clues between the lines. But overall, my favorite thing about 500 Days of Summer is the way that they structured the film to mimic the way we recall memory.
Because Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind does that also. Very similar in the story of looking back on a relationship, looking back on it falls apart. Eternal
Exactly.
Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, quite literally, his memories are falling apart as he's losing them.
Exactly. And I just watched this for the first time yesterday.
Did you
So
really?
yeah,
I didn't know
I
that.
so many people had been telling me to go see it, and it was one of those things where I was like, now I have this built up expectation of this film, and going into it, I will be completely honest, I was very resistant to even liking it. I just kind of kept it at arm's length and
It's one of those movies that people go around going, "It's the greatest thing ever."
exactly, and I also wasn't in the mood for depression and melancholy nature of Michel Gondry and Andy Kaufman, but when I was
Charlie
watching it
Kaufman.
Charlie Kaufman, what did I
Andy
say?
Andy Kaufman is the comedian who was on Taxi in the
Oh,
'70s,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
who would go
What
on stage.
I said
Yeah,
Andy
you said
Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
Andy Kaufman would go on stage as a stand-up comedian and read The Great Gatsby until everyone left, and
Well,
it
and
wasn't a bit.
Jim Carrey was the guy
Y
who played him and kind
yes.
of
Uh-huh.
that's when he went crazy.
Mhm.
But I will say
What did
it
you think
won
of it? Did you
it
like
won
it?
me over. I mean, it won me over almost forcefully.
Really?
Yeah, and particularly the moment that really won me over was when the memory erasing process began and his memories began to clash sort of in this psychedelic manner.
Yeah.
I love experimental filmmaking, and it felt like Michel Gondry has kind of roots in experimental
Oh,
filmmaking. Or at
very
least a lot
much.
of his films feel like those Russian experimental films we used to watch in film school.
His
And
music
it
videos are the same way too.
yeah, and I feel like he was bringing that into this story, and I thought it was very interesting. And it's similar to 500 Days of Summer in that the erasing process in the movie works backwards. So they begin to erase the most recent memories first and then work their way backwards. And as they begin to erase the bad memories, he begins to resist the procedure. And a lot of times
Mhm.
that's what we do when we're looking back at a relationship, be it romantic or even platonic. The negative memories are the first to go because it's the most painful to dwell on. But the moment that hooked me was when he begins to try to hide Clementine
Yeah.
in unrelated memories. I thought that was just so clever. It was like Inception before Inception.
Kinda.
And I think it surprised me because I thought this was going to be another one of those vague mumblecore independent films, but it, somewhat had a plot, be it not overt, but in that his goal is to try to smuggle pieces of Clementine in his psyche or subconscious in the hopes of remembering her when he wakes up.
Michel Gondry's other movie, The Science of Sleep, which deals with similar themes, is
Yeah.
more of an experimental in nature film about memory, about relationships and things like that. So you can see kind of both. And the
Mhm.
combination of Charlie Kaufman and Michel Gondry go really well together
Yeah.
because Michel Gondry does have a cinematic eye and is very dynamic in selection and constructing the scene. Charlie Kaufman kind of scattered all over the place, and I
Yeah.
think you see that in a lot of his other stuff. A lot of the stuff that doesn't have the firm hand of a really good director, Michel Gondry, Spike Jonze, he did Being John Malkovich, which Charlie Kaufman also wrote, and that could very much have gone off the rails too. I don't love Being John Malkovich that much, but you can tell that Spike Jonze really steered that in a way that made it watchable.
Well, yeah, it feels like Charlie Kaufman has a certain language that needs an interpreter in order
Yeah.
to show it on screen, and because they are very kind of complex ideas, but I thought it was done very well.
Do you know a lot of Jim Carrey? Did you watch a lot of Jim Carrey growing up?
Yeah, a lot.
So when
Like
you
Liar
saw
Liar
him
and
but you've seen Jim Carrey in other stuff that's been
yeah, like
serious
the
too,
the
so this
Truman
wasn't really
Show.
the first
No.
serious Jim Carrey thing. Yeah,
No,
so
I think
maybe
the Truman Show was before this,
that's
right?
true. Yeah,
So
it
I
came out in
think
1999.
this wasn't the first time I had seen Jim Carrey do something serious. Like
Yeah,
I
so
knew I
it wasn't as big of a stretch or a leap in logic
yeah.
as because I remember seeing Eternal Sunshine back in 2007, 8
Mhm.
when Jim Carrey being serious Jim Carrey was not as accepted as it is now. And it was strange because I was expecting the guy from Ace Ventura. I don't know if I'd seen The Truman Show at that point. I hadn't seen Man on the Moon at that point where he played Andy Kaufman, but
Yeah.
seeing Jim Carrey not coming out of a rhinoceros's anus was a little jarring.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the greatest scene ever. Ah, that's so amazing.
I don't remember seeing those movies in full when I was younger, but that is the one scene that I saw on television that stuck in my psyche
That
even
might
as a
be
child.
that might be the greatest scene in cinema history.
No, I agree. I mean, yeah, like Rosebud out the window.
Jim Carrey,
Jim Carrey coming out of a rhinoceros anus.
quality.
Quality. But I also love the side story also. I mean, can we talk about the clinic and the people that work in this clinic?
Yeah.
And what the oh my god. They're all terrible.
Yeah.
What the like, they're so unprofessional, and Elijah
Their story is what knocks this movie down a little bit for me. I really didn't like them. Kirsten Dunst's character, ugh, she got on my
okay,
nerves. Ruffalo's character too. I was like, you guys are kind of pretentious
so
douchebags.
so here's where I disagree, and if you would have asked me halfway through the movie, I would have agreed that the side stories were, unnecessary and heavy-handed
Yeah.
until the main doctor comes to the apartment and is trying to fix the issue with the procedure due to Mark Ruffalo's incompetence. But when Kirsten Dunst is making all these comments, and you realize she has this almost adolescent crush that a young girl might have on a teacher or professor,
Yeah.
but it's really the doctor's reaction that was weird. You're watching it play out and you're somewhat confused.
Uh-huh.
Does he know she's high? Does He knows she has a crush on him, and then it's revealed that she has also had her memory erased and that they've already had an affair. That paired with Clementine's descent into madness, or at least seemingly, because she has been presented as this impulsive, manic person. So you write it off as that.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, Elijah Wood is trying to manipulate her to fall in love with him by trying to recreate her relationship with Joel, but with him instead. And I think in those side stories, you begin to realize how flawed this process is and how it's just not foolproof,
Mhm.
because Kirsten Dunst and Clementine both have gone through the procedure and are acting out based on these unexplained impulses, sort of to say our personalities are informed by our experiences. And just because you erase those experiences, or at least the memory of them, they've already shaped our personality. And it leaves this sort of residue in your subconscious. So, in a way, to suppress bad memories or bad experiences is an exercise in futility because it will always resurface.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, it kinda reminded me of Palm Springs when Andy Samberg is talking about his girlfriend cheating on him with the cowboy hat guy. He says, "Trust me, there isn't a world where these 2 don't end up together." And in a way, saying what is meant to be will happen despite your greatest efforts.
That's a good point because a lot of movies that play with time also deal with memory, and a lot of these films come to the conclusion that you can't really change anything and that you're just gonna keep replaying the same things over and over and over again, and everything is inevitable.
Yeah, and what I liked about this is that it was very similar to Arrival, another movie that played with time.
Mhm.
Arrival does kind of the same thing, but it also leaves the characters and the audience with the question, if you knew the outcome of a certain relationship or situation, would you still choose to experience it?
The inevitability of a lot of the ways that time is portrayed in these types of movies, it also presents things as time slowing down in a quite literal way in, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where you're slowing down the moments in time, and they play a lot with
Mhm.
that in Michel Gondry does that a lot too. 500 Days of Summer does too.
Yeah.
I wanna say Arrival, it doesn't do it literally in that slowing it down, but kind of the weight of the end of that movie is crushing. It's one of the most incredible endings you're gonna see.
Yeah, I agree. And what I love most about Arrival is that it wasn't only a great film, but it was very relevant given the time it came out. It came out just after the 2016 election,
It did.
and it, believe it or not, immediately made it into my top 10 or 20 list of all-time favorite films.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, for one, it approached the alien invasion genre from the perspective that we've never seen before, which is that of a language interpreter. Usually it's from the point of view of a scientist, soldier, or
Yeah.
leader, president, whatever it might be. But in seeing it through the eyes of a linguist, we are provided insight into the heart of the film, which is not so much about an alien invasion,
Mhm.
rather it's about language and communication, the pitfalls and breakdowns in human communication, and how we can assign meaning to others' actions based on the limited context that we have, and how easy it is for intention and truth to be lost due to our own bias and limited understanding, which is why I felt it was so relevant,
Mhm.
be it between humans and aliens, the United States and other countries. Like the moment when they perceive one of the statements made by the aliens as a threat of aggression. And instead of taking the approach of humans against aliens, the various countries begin to isolate and stop talking to one another, which was such an impactful moment for me because of how realistic it is. And it instead becomes the US against aliens or China against the aliens, where the path to the solution lies in them working together. But I even loved it from a structural standpoint. In the movie, the aliens' language is nonlinear. It comes in the form of almost floating ink blotches that are circular with no beginning and no end. And the film adopts that very form by its structure being circular in a way. I felt like it was a masterclass in filmmaking. I mean, Denis Villeneuve is one of the best filmmakers of our time, in my opinion.
Oh, he's such a good choice to direct the new Dune.
Yeah, I'm about to start reading it before the movie comes out. But yeah, I mean, like, look at Blade Runner.
Blade Runner 49 is so incredible.
I almost like it as much, if not more, than the original.
I think that I might like it more than the original. And I really like the original Blade Runner.
Yeah, I agree. 2049 was a great example of a sequel building on the previous film, whereas I feel like sequels nowadays copy and paste the exact plot points and beats of the first film. And so they feel like less of sequels and more reboots. Like Jurassic World did that too.
Jurassic World, yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for his Dune. I love Arrival. I love Sicario. I think Sicario might be my favorite of his movies, even though it's so pulpy and just dirty. Like
I do too.
literally, like everyone in there is just covered in dust the whole time. It's a great. It's not a gangster story. It's a crime drama. It's a crime drama. I love Sicario.
Yeah, Sicario was good, but I don't think I recognized his brilliance in that as much as I did in Arrival in 2049.
I think the conclusion we've come to at this point is if you're going to start playing with time, you need a through line or a narrative that is sort of almost quote unquote boring. Like you need a kind of almost a boring story spine in order to kind of play around with other things, to play with the time, right? 500 Days of Summer, it can jump back and forth because it's a pretty easy rom-com narrative. You're
Mhm.
familiar with the tropes of romantic comedies,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you're taking something ordinary and then playing with its structure. Because 500 Days of Summer, if you were to tell it sequentially, wouldn't even be a three-act structure. It's pretty straightforward. There is no
It's kind of it's a boring story, or at least it's not a
yeah,
boring story, but it's a story that we've seen 100 times before.
exactly. Just presented in the manner in which we experience it ourselves as human
Exactly.
beings.
Whereas you need something, but you need that easy structure though, in order to start playing around with stuff. Because if you don't have that narrative spine, it can get jumbled and lost. I'm thinking about Synecdoche, New York, which was Charlie Kaufman's directorial debut. Have you ever seen it?
Mm-mm.
Philip Seymour Hoffman plays a guy in New York who builds this life-size model of the city in a warehouse. And it goes over his basically his entire life, and it starts jumping back and forth in his life as he's building this and as he goes through, his relationships, things like that. And I did not care for it. I also
Yeah.
thought that it needed a firmer hand and it needed a firmer structure in order for me to a kind of care,
Yeah.
but also just for the plot, like the momentum of it to move forward. Because there would be times where it would cut from one shot to the next and it's, years later. And I didn't really care that much because the whole time we're just cutting back and forth and I'm thinking, well, what are we cutting for? There's really nothing to hang on to.
Yeah, when you're playing with the sequence of a film, you need a simple foundation. Like
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction was great in that all three crime stories are very straightforward.
So building it around a story that's really easy to follow, and Pulp Fiction actually is a great example, right? It takes really cliche or what could be cliche tropes
Yeah.
and presents it in a way that are really compelling. Bruce Willis's character, the aging boxer who doesn't take a dive and takes the money, right? That's
Mhm.
such a 1920s, 30s novel, hard-boiled novel character.
Yeah, they're
It
very
takes
archetypal characters and storylines.
very much, so it does kind of make it easily digestible as you are doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, and what I like about that is that each story's characters are intertwined by certain events, and yet they each have a complete character arc. Sort of like everyone being the main character of their own lives or own
Yeah.
stories. But because they're reaching the end of their arcs at different times in terms of chronology, it was appropriate that it was told non-linearly so that by the end of the film, they've all reached the end of their arc at the same time.
Have you ever seen I wanna go back to Michel Gondry, this just popped into my head. Have you ever seen Dave Chappelle's Block Party from
No.
2004? It has nothing to do with time, but as we were talking about Michel Gondry, it's a time capsule. So, I mean, future episode, we could
Yeah.
talk about time capsule movies, but it's the most incredible picture of 2004 or early 2000s, 2003, whenever it was shot, that I could ever imagine. It was
Really?
an incredible. I remember watching it and going, nobody ever really captured 2004. Like early 2000s, I remember it very distinctly, but it's a really incredible time capsule.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah, and it was directed by Michel Gondry, and all it is Dave Chappelle.
With Dave Chappelle in it?
Yeah, it's Dave Chappelle's Block Party, and it was directed by Michel Gondry, and all it is a block party. and it's got
Oh,
music.
interesting.
Oh, yeah, it's so weird that Michel Gondry would do this.
Yeah, that's they don't even sound
Yeah.
like they
No, I know,
they
right?
match. Yeah.
Look,
I kinda
watch
wanna
it.
check that
It's
out. Yeah.
watch Oh, and you will go back to your childhood too, because with the fashion and with just the way people are, and even just the way Dave Chappelle looks, you'll go back right to Chappelle's Show era Dave Chappelle. It's a fascinating time capsule
If
movie.
you're gonna do a period piece of the early 2000s, what would you
I have
I
no
mean,
idea.
right? And then so I was I started Friday Night Lights with Christina because
Mhm.
I really want her to watch it because it was one of the
Oh,
biggest shows for all of us, right? The whole group, we were all watching it at the same time.
yeah.
And I was watching, I was like, "Oh, that's what the early 2000s looks like."
Yeah, it is actually.
It is very much a time capsule of that time. Just the fashion and the high school character archetypes are so different now, but it almost doesn't hold up. We're only in the 2nd episode though.
Of season 1?
Yeah,
Oh, no, the pilot of Friday Night Lights is one of the best pilots ever.
that's literally what I told Christina, and she
Oh,
looks
I'm
at me,
not.
she's like, "Really?"
Oh, yeah.
Because she's, like, looking, and she's like, "I could never live in this town."
No, season 1 of Friday Night Lights, I think, is one of the best complete seasons of a television show.
I mean, the pilot
The
itself,
pilot is
if you
incredible.
it's 45 minutes of pure character development in the sense that I know every single
Yeah,
character by the end of it. You know who they are, which I think did it very well and without you really realizing it. The only one, I mean, Matt Saracen does get a lot of kind of screen time, but he doesn't get as much character development. But even
no.
then, that is his character basically. No one knows who he is.
Yeah,
And they're meant to do that. And in the end with Jason Street, you're just like, oh my God, I want to know what happened. It
yeah.
really did a good job of keeping you interested for the next episode.
Incredible. I think that came out
Yeah.
in 2007, I think?
2006.
2006.
Yeah, because I looked it up. Christina's
Yeah,
like, "Wait, when did this come out?"
yeah.
And I was like, I don't know." And I checked and I was like, "Oh, 2006." And she's like, "I thought it was older." I was like, "That's not a good sign."
Well, no, because it's shot on 16 millimeter, because it has that
Yeah, yeah,
older type of
grainy.
grainy look
Mhm. I
of
mean, that was when even Under Armour wasn't really a
oh,
big
yeah.
brand. Under Armour was
Yeah.
sponsoring the show, and that's how they grew their market share.
I mean, you kind of have if you're looking at time capsule stuff, the mumblecore movies became big at that
Yeah.
point. Not big, but they started. I think Funny Haha, not Funny Haha, whatever the
What
first
was the
one was.
couch? There was one with a couch.
Oh, the puffy
Yeah, Puffy
couch.
Couch.
The puffy chair is what
That's
you're
right,
thinking
that's
of.
right. Yeah.
Puffy chair. That was the Duplass
Yeah,
brothers.
and then, Juno.
Juno, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a 2007. Superbad was 2007 also. So, you know what? There are a lot of kind of mid 2000s
Yeah,
types of movies that you could
and
look
a
at.
lot of them were kind of adolescent coming of age stories, I think because the filmmakers of
Yeah,
that generation were just coming out of that, but yeah, I think it is very different than what we're seeing now. Like, I didn't watch Euphoria, but Euphoria is
I
very
watched Euphoria. It's
it
real
seems
depressing.
yeah, I'm like, "Oh my god, someone get Gen Z some help." It looks
Yeah,
really,
man.
really sad.
It is. It's harrowing.
I
And
mean, yeah.
Zendaya's on there, and she's just a drug addict, and she's just like, "I'll do anything for drugs. Drugs, drugs, drugs forever." And I was like, "What happened to Skins, where teenagers just had fun while doing drugs?" Oh,
Yes.
Skins is also a great 2007. It's British, but that was
Mhm.
2007 also. The first 2 series of Skins also might be my favorite seasons. I mean, I think season 2 is probably better. The series 2 finale of Skins is maybe the best series finale of a show, or at least a teen drama that I
Oh,
can think of.
I
I
was thinking a
love Skins.
I was thinking a different
Were you thinking of The Inbetweeners?
yeah, The Inbetweeners.
Yeah. I love The
Uh
Inbetweeners also.
Yeah,
You would
I've
dig
only
The
watched, like,
Inbetweeners.
the yeah, I watched the first 3 episodes, like, the one where his car door comes off at the
Yeah.
that whole thing and then getting a drink at the bar, and
Yeah.
it was actually really funny.
As you start getting farther back in time, it's more difficult. The one that comes to mind as the farthest back that could be a time capsule is The Naked City in 1948,
Mhm.
because that was billed as on the poster, it said shot on location in New York using the real streets. And it is a noir that was
Oh,
shot
interesting.
on real locations because they're all shot on sets at that point, in the
Yeah.
40s, 50s. I mean, from the beginning of time, cinema.
Yeah,
It was shot on real locations in New York, but
and that's
that's
not
really
common, I mean
no, not in 1948,
yeah.
and that's why that's the first one that I can think of that could could be considered, I guess, quote unquote, a time capsule of that time.
I feel like when I first saw Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a friend of mine at work who grew up in the 80s told me to go watch it. And because I had seen most of the, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 16 Candles, all that stuff, but
Pretty
I
in
hadn't
Pink.
seen, yeah, I hadn't seen that specific movie. And so just the way that they set it up, the establishing shots of the mall and things like that, it was shot like a period piece.
I wonder if that's because Cameron Crowe wrote it. And Cameron Crowe was a journalist, obviously. So he had a very journalistic feel. It was based off a book that he wrote that he actually went back to high school as an adult to document kind of high school.
Really?
And then, yeah, wrote the book that it's based on. So it has journalistic roots inside
That
of it.
that does sound like it might be why it seems like that.
It could be. I don't know.
It was almost establishing, hey, this is the time of arcades. This is the time of going to
Yeah.
mall with your friends or getting a summer job.
Almost Famous does that too. Because Almost Famous is based on his experiences following bands when he was
Yeah.
writing for Rolling Stone. And it wasn't shot in the 70s, but it's based on when he was doing that in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it's very journalistic in that way of exploring it, and because the main character is a journalist.
That's right, yeah. I haven't seen it in so long, Jesus, since high school.
Almost Famous is so good.
But getting back to the theme, I'm curious what you thought of Arrival.
I did like Arrival. I liked Arrival a lot. I was not expecting Arrival when I saw it. By that I mean I didn't know what type of movie it would be, and then all of a sudden Arrival ended and I was blown away. I was like, "What did I just watch?" Because I did not know what to expect.
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise. I could tell from the premise that the trailer presented that it would be different, and it was so different from what we're used to when it comes to the alien genre.
Mhm.
It was captivating and emotional, but not emotional in a cheap or manipulative way in the way that I think Christopher Nolan's films can be sometimes,
No.
where you look back on the emotional points and you realize how flimsy they are.
Can see the strings. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
Interstellar
exactly.
is.
That's a perfect way to put it. I can see the strings. Arrival was graceful in the way that it went about it.
Do you think you felt that way? Do you think you felt that way because Arrival is much more emotional, and even though Interstellar is also more emotional, Christopher Nolan is a very intellectual in design. Christopher Nolan, I love Christopher Nolan. He's all strings, man. Inception is it's all strings because that's the point. It's a heist. And so everything has to be very meticulously planned. And so there's not a lot of feelings going on in Inception.
And don't get me wrong. I love Christopher Nolan's films. They're ambitious and inspiring, but and I mentioned this in the last episode, I feel like he tries to fit in these emotional narratives into these high concept sci-fis, which I think is great because strong emotional motivation heightens the stakes and provides more substance to the character's goals and actions. Sure, entering someone's dream and pulling off a sort of reverse heist is great and all, but
Yeah.
doing all this in order to get back to his otherwise orphaned children is a compelling why. But I think despite the emotional through lines in his films, they take a back seat to spectacle and it
Yeah.
feels less sincere. Whereas Arrival didn't feel heavy handed, it felt effortless and natural.
Much different tone too than a lot of the sci-fi things we get in today's age of superhero films. Maybe that's unfair. Arrival's not trying to be that. Arrival's trying to be something completely different. But it's strange to see aliens on screen that aren't blowing things up or somebody making pithy dialogue.
Yeah, and
And I love pithy dialogue. I do. But Arrival was trying to be something so completely different. And that's probably Denis Villeneuve's influence.
perspective.
That's his
Yeah.
hand too, because everything he does has a different perspective. Like Enemy with the movie where he sees a double of himself
Mm. I
is
remember seeing the trailers. I haven't seen it though.
the cinematography of it looks so ugly, but it's so ugly by design and the
Oh wait, the
perspective
double.
on it.
He
No,
did the double?
you're thinking of the double with Jesse Eisenberg that was directed by Richard Ayoade, who was a
Yeah.
British comedian. This was a different one
Okay.
that Denis Villeneuve did. Same type of story where somebody sees a doppelganger of themselves, but Enemy is much more stark in its tone, whereas the
Mhm.
double with Jesse Eisenberg has some comedy to it. It has some black comedy to it, which makes sense because Richard Ayoade is a comedian. He did Submarine too, which is a black comedy. And I really like Richard Ayoade too.
Yeah, I actually like the double a lot. But I agree with what you're saying about Denis and sort of his perspective. And Arrival was so different in tone because the central conflict wasn't an alien attack. Rather, it was by presenting something unknown like a giant alien ship. we automatically assume malicious intent. And he uses the audience and the character's bias against them,
Mhm.
just in the way that he uses a Kuleshov effect against the audience in the beginning. For those of you who don't know, the Kuleshov effect is one of the foundations of film language, whereby when we are shown two shots sequentially, we derive context. The most popular demonstration is by Alfred Hitchcock, where he shows a shot of himself smiling while looking off screen, and the next shot is of a mother playing with a baby, leading us to believe, oh, he's a nice family man. And then showing the same exact shot of him smiling, but then cutting to a girl in a bikini instead. And then the meaning of the first shot is changed to him coming off as sort of a creep. And in the film, which itself is about language, Villeneuve uses this technique of film language that we are all subconsciously aware of against us in the beginning. If you haven't seen the movie, skip about a minute forward because it's kind of a spoiler. But he opens the movie with the birth and short life of Amy Adams' daughter, leading to her passing from cancer. And the very next scene is of Amy Adams arriving to work on the morning before the invasion and is seemingly detached and somber. And so we immediately think it's because she's still recovering from the passing of her daughter. And in the end, it's revealed to us that her daughter hasn't even been born yet. And none of what happens in the beginning with her daughter happens until after the events of the alien invasion. And Villeneuve does this a lot during the course of the film, where he presents an unknown circumstance and the characters automatically assign to it malicious intent, at least the characters in kind of the military and the government, in the same way that we do with anything that's unknown. We first approach it as a threat before really understanding
You
it.
know what you know what also does that? Is, funnily enough, you ever see Tucker and Dale versus Evil?
I love that movie. It is exactly
It's the same
good
thing,
call.
though. It's the
Yeah,
same
good
thing
call.
of taking the perspective and shifting it a little bit, because
Hmm.
Tucker and Dale versus Evil is a horror comedy from the perspective, quote unquote, of the killers in a
Yeah.
normal horror movie, which Tucker and Dale versus Evil, or Tucker and Dale, are played by Tyler Labine and whatever his name
Yeah, I
is.
forgot the other guy.
I can't remember his name now. And now I'm gonna look it up because I'm
I just keep hearing every time I hear Tucker and Dale versus Evils,
Alan Tudyk.
these teenage kids keep coming onto our property and killing themselves. It's so funny. But I agree. It is so good.
Alan
Like,
Tudyk. Alan Tudyk is the other guy.
yeah.
No, but it's the same thing. Like, that's very much a Rashomon idea of
Yeah, yeah.
taking a story that is usually told from one perspective and turning it on its head. And for Tucker and Dale versus Evil, I mean, comedy genius.
It really is,
It
yeah.
was brilliant. Tell the story from the perspective of the backwater, hicks that are usually the killers in these types of stories.
But I also love comedies that are based out of misunderstanding. They're just they're so funny to watch because every single action that the person takes, no matter what it is going to only reinforce what they already think. And so again, like, I completely agree. I didn't ever think of it that way, but it really is two sides of the same coin, those two films, two very
Arri-
different genres.
Arrival
But
and Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Great double feature.
no, I completely agree. That makes me really happy to hear.
Well, it seems like comedies can do this a little bit more, because we've talked about 500 Days of Summer, Eternal Sunshine. They're comedies. Eternal Sunshine is more of a drama. I mean, but Tucker and Dale too. The Hangover does this, because The Hangover plays with time. It not in the
In a
same way as
it
an Eternal Sunshine, but it does play with time in that it doesn't do the typical thing of going to flashbacks. They're lost time, and now they're trying to gain it back. It's not the flashy. It's not as
no, I
intellectual
yeah,
as Eternal Sunshine.
it is a comedy version of Reservoir Dogs when you think about it.
Kind of.
You don't see the drunk night out, you just see the aftermath of it and how they deal with it.
But I don't think you can stretch. Do you think that Eternal Sunshine could have been a show? Do you think
No.
this concept could be stretched out? I don't either. I think that if you're going to play with time like this and play with perspective, it has to be in a contained narrative, because I don't, or I should say it like this. It needs to be about something else other than just playing with time, because the thing that I thought of too when we were talking about this wasn't a movie, it was Westworld,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
just came out, and especially the first season of Westworld.
Westworld was structured kind of like Arrival in a sense.
Kinda. I mean, it was written by Jonathan Nolan, who
Yeah.
wrote a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies,
Mhm.
which makes sense. They have similar sensibilities, and the timelines of Westworld, that's the big reveal at the end, is that Jimmy Simpson's character and Ed Harris's character, the Man in Black, and in the beginning, Jimmy Simpson is the Man in White, man he
Sorry,
went to work at.
not Arrival, it's Dunkirk. It's a
I
lot like Dunkirk.
in that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
My apologies, continue, sorry.
No, I knew what you I weirdly knew what you meant too,
Because we had just talked about
because we
Dunkirk the
just
last
talked about
episode.
Dunkirk.
Yeah.
But even after episode 1, I remember people on the internet and things like that going, "Oh yeah, Ed Harris and Jimmy Simpson's character, they're the same. Same guy, different timelines, obviously." And when you look at it from that perspective, or when you think you know the answer, it's not as compelling, or maybe not as compelling as the showrunner thought.
I honestly didn't see it coming. I think because I'm not usually looking for, where the movie or TV show is going to go or like try to predict where it's going to go, at least with most movies and television shows. Depending on the filmmaker. But I don't think it can sustain a structure like that over the course of an entire show. Maybe one season,
Yeah.
but after a while, it begins to feel like an M. Night Shyamalan movie where you're expecting a twist at the
Yeah.
end, and so you're distracted the whole time trying to figure it out.
To its credit, it didn't do that in season 2 and 3. Did you keep watching?
I believe the last season I saw was the second. That's when she escapes, right? Was that the second season?
Yeah. She also does it in the first season. It kind of backtracks a little bit. Tandy Newton, she's the best part of that show, though. Evan Rachel Wood really bothered me in that show. I didn't like her at all. Tandy Newton was the one who gets dissected and then kind of becomes more aware. Um, I mean, I guess Evan Rachel Wood's character does too, but she does it in such a boring way that I didn't care at all.
Yeah.
She's the one that kind of like leads the revolution. Tandy Newton does.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's
She
not
is
true.
very
That's not
interesting.
true either. Evan Rachel Wood's character technically does literally lead the revolution, but Tandy Newton's character is the one that's in the
She
lab more.
Yeah, and you begin to see it through her eyes, I think, a lot more,
Yeah.
in the beginning at least.
I'm
But,
just
like
realizing that a lot of the robots in that show seem to have similar arcs.
that's how they're designed, Joe.
I mean, kind of.
But I agree. You can't sustain the structure of something like Eternal Sunshine in the form of a show. I think Lost tried to do it, and after 3 seasons, they ran out of flashbacks and then went into flash forwards and eventually got very muddy.
Well, yeah, because from what I understand, I've never seen Lost. And from what I understand, it just collapsed in on itself to where it became a weird, tangled mess of just nonsense that nobody could decipher. And you were sitting there watching it. From what you've told me, you're sitting there watching it going, yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean,
Whatever, man.
don't get me wrong. I do like Lost to an extent. It was very enjoyable to watch, and they explore interesting philosophical concepts, but they would keep presenting these new mysteries and asking new questions with the promise of answers. And on the rare occasion you did get an answer, it wasn't as interesting as the question itself. And I feel like that over time diminished the trust you had in the showrunners. So your confusion or anticipation turns into frustration.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going into confusing, sort of heady territory, you need to have built trust with the audience. Where if at any point I feel confused or you feel confused, you trust that you're meant to, that they're doing this on purpose. And that goes back to what we were saying about simplicity in a story where you're playing with time.
From what I understand about Lost, none of it was time travel, or maybe all of it was time travel. Who's to say, really?
No, there was a part where
Oh, was there actually
the
literally time travel?
yeah, there was time travel because at one point there is this electromagnetic explosion of energy and that causes the island to skip through time.
What?
Yeah, they explained it as if a vinyl record was time and the island was the needle, but it kept skipping. So all these different timelines begin to clash on the island, sort of like if we were driving down the 405 and a dinosaur begins to cross the freeway, and then you run into a man from the 1940s LA. Like the the characters on the island begin to experience all these different events at the same time and they begin to clash.
Oh, that's fun.
It was really fun and it was really cool. And one of the main characters, Desmond,
Oh, I know that
has
name. I know that
yeah,
name.
and I'm sure you've heard the
Oh,
the
wait,
phrase "the
one
constant."
no, I don't know that.
He needs to find like a constant, and it's the love of his life. She's the one that kind of grounds him because time keeps skipping, and he's starting to get lost in the space time continuum. And
Okay.
so he needs something to tether him back to reality, and she's his tether. It's enjoyable while you're watching it.
What was I watching? What was I watching in 2004 that I wasn't watching Lost? It wasn't 24, that was also big at the same time, which I also completely missed out on.
I watched 3 seasons of 24, and again, it did the same thing. It had the same premise over the course of every season, where halfway through the season, there's a mole in
Yeah,
the CIA office or whatever it is, and then they have to find the mole, and so it just kept doing that every season. I was like, "Okay, I'm over it." Same thing with Dexter. I feel like Dexter, every season, he is about to get caught, and
yeah.
so that conflict wears off on you after a while because you
I
know they're just not going to get caught.
I haven't watched Dexter either, which is also a really big show. I'm now starting to think, "What do I watch? What do I look at?"
You don't watch The Office, you don't watch Dexter.
Oh, no,
Breaking Bad, you
I
watch
don't.
Breaking
I
Bad?
watch Breaking Bad. I don't like The Office. I think The Office is bad, personally, and I don't wanna watch any of those characters. I think they are all irritating and should be thrown off a bus.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, I
Wow,
don't like The
Joe.
Office at all.
I know you don't.
I know,
It's
I
it's
don't like
one of
things
the
that are popular,
one of the well, I mean,
apparently. I don't mean to.
no, I would say by no means are you a
Contrarian.
contrarian. I I am like that about certain things. I don't like the Marvel movies, which we somewhat disagree on. I think you know where I'm coming from, but you like them.
Oh, I completely understand where you're coming from. I know you don't like them. They don't look great cinematography-wise,
It's
and
not
this
even that they don't look great, they just all look the same.
they all you're completely right. They all look all the same. I just kinda don't care. I just go, "Yeah, these are not this is not Arrival. These are Marvel movies,
But
and Marvel movies can be their own thing."
they don't need to be like Arrival. Jurassic Park was a great sci-fi action movie or thriller that had a great story. Mad Max was action from start to finish, but it still made me care more than most Marvel movies. They don't need to be these cinematic masterpieces that comment on the human condition, but at least have conflict that makes me care. I dispute the implication that just because a movie is meant to be fun or action packed that it shouldn't also tell a good story or make me care. And maybe my problem is the formulaic nature of Marvel movies. Every Marvel movie just feels the same.
It's true.
I'm not saying I dislike all superhero movies, just most of them do not excite me. They don't resonate with me. Now you got me all riled up, Joe. We need to do an episode on this in the future.
Look, Thor in the 3rd Thor got his hair cut, and it was traumatic. The beautiful hair of Chris Hemsworth, gone. They chopped it off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, in conclusion, what I like most about the films we discussed is that the filmmaker allowed the subject matter or theme to guide the structure of the film. Whether it's 500 Days of Summer and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, both recalling past relationships using non sequential storytelling to mimic the way memory works, or Arrival using the audience and the language of film to demonstrate how easily truth can be lost in translation. We would love to hear from you. What are your favorite films that use non sequential storytelling? Did you agree or disagree with anything we discussed? Let us know on YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find all those links on channel8.5.com. That's channel8.5, completely spelled out.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking and sharing with family and friends.
We have new episodes every Thursday. Until next time, my name is Joe Galena.
And I'm Andrew Hanna, and this is Channel 8.5.